welcome to What the Fringe, the podcast dedicated to all things Fringe theater. I'm your host, Lauren Hantz. Each week, I visit with a Fringe artist to hear all about their endeavors and gain insight into their process. This week, I'm visiting with Sarah Lita LeClair of Riot Productions and their 2025 Fringe show, Death and Murder and Poison and Scene. Death and Murder and Poison and Scene is a murder mystery farce in the style of Noises Off, with a cast of actors in the midst of putting on a murder mystery play. When one of the actors has a psychotic break and starts trying to kill people on stage, the rest of the cast must adjust around her. All the while, secrets, resentments, and bodies come tumbling out. Inspired by the truly absurd true story of A Perfect Crime, the longest-running show in New York, which has a 1-star Yelp review and yet more performances than Cats. Catherine Russell, who has played the leading lady since day one, also sells concessions and runs the box office to keep this truly terrible show open for over 30 years, leading to the question that Riot is trying to answer with this play. Why?
We just started a year ago, and then we were coming out of COVID, as you said. There were a lot of companies, unfortunately, that were having a hard time paying their rent, and we made the shift, I think, as a city from like 6-week runs and, 4 nights or 6 nights a week. We were starting to see 3-week runs and 4-week runs or 2-week runs, and things were getting shorter. So there was more space for other small theaters. And so we saw a ton of small theater. I think there's maybe 20 small theater companies like me that have very specific missions. So some that are just for specific BIPOC groups, specific LGBT groups, some that are specifically about presenting drag, some that are just for music, for cabaret projects. So it was a great time to do that.
Sarah Lita LeClair is a singer, actress, writer, and performing arts educator in San Diego, California, and the artistic director of Riot Productions Incorporated, an intersectional Women-X theater production company. Riot Productions focuses on telling women's stories first and foremost, not just as women who exist as someone's wife, girlfriend, sister, mother, friend, and not as an instrument of growth for others, but who are the center of their own arc and agency. Riot highlights local female writers, both as playwrights and composers, and features primarily female casts, directors, and production teams. Sarah's play, Audition Sides, won Outstanding World Premiere at the 2024 San Diego Fringe Festival. Sarah holds a Master's of Music and Vocal Performance from San Diego State and is an accomplished pianist and has been a professional singer and actor in the San Diego area since 2012. She will have been a high school teacher of choir, musical theater, and English and literature up until June, when she will be leaving education to shift into producing art for Riot Productions full time. Sarah, welcome to What the Fringe.
I'm so excited to talk to another Fringer. This is going to be so fun.
I am so excited to have you here. So we got connected because we're both going to be performing at the San Diego Fringe Festival this year in May. And I was scoping out all of the different artists that are going to be there. We got this little document with everybody. And so I start stalking people. If people that listen to the podcast know, I'm an avid stalker, not in like creepy bad way, but I stalk other artists. And I came across your production, and then I was able to find you on YouTube. And I was like, this chick looks like so much fun. And thankfully, you said yes to being on the podcast. So here we are.
Absolutely. I have such a love for like content creation and using that as a medium for us to get our message out and to talk about our storytelling, because if we're not getting people to come to our shows, then what are we doing? So it's so great that you've created this. I'm so grateful to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, let's talk a little bit about your content creation, because not only are you working with Riot Productions, but you have Piano and Heels, which doesn't really have much to do with this show, I'm assuming. Yes. So tell me about that channel just really quick, because I think it's very interesting.
So I teach in an underprivileged, underserved community, economically disadvantaged, primarily BIPOC folk. And I was finding that when we would go to show choir competitions, we're competing with kids from LA that have had, dance lessons, tumbling lessons, acting lessons. They've had just this wealth of education poured into them. By the time they were 14, they've got 10 years worth of gymnastics. And then I'm getting kids as freshmen who didn't even have elementary school music. So I had to try to figure out, how do I try to close that gap a little bit for my kids so that not only can we, compete better when we go to competition, but so that they could continue to have music in their lives, whatever that looked like. If they were going to be in local community theater, many of my students have become like Spotify artists, iTunes artists, or I've had kids that have gone on to have movie careers. So like, how do we get them there? So my Piano in Heels is really trying to make music accessible. So I have a ton of like voice lessons on there. During COVID quarantine, most of my students didn't have access to Wi-Fi in their homes, and they didn't have good smartphones. They didn't all have Chromebooks. And even if they did, they didn't have Wi-Fi hotspots. So what I did was Instagram Lives, because that was the easiest thing that they could get onto. And so I just recorded Instagram Lives, Facebook Lives. I made a TikTok channel, and that's literally how I taught them. And then I found, especially through TikTok, that as I was doing these like silly little things, the way that I joke with my high school students, there were a ton of kids who were super missing their choir teachers and their theater teachers. And so like my following on TikTok at one time was like 30,000 or something followers, just of kids who were like, mother, but also just trying to give, audition tips, things that I've heard as an accompanist, stuff that I know the director says when you leave the room, trying to debunk myths, things that I think like wealthy people have access to all that information. If you went to conservatory, you have access to that. So let me give you those secrets for free.
I didn't realize the rich history behind that, and what a gift that came out of such a terrible time in our world history that you were able to give that to these students. And I have a kid that's about to be in high school, and she's interested in some sports, but she's never played them before. And sometimes I kind of go, oh, is she too far behind? And then someone said, once they get to that age, like your students that you're getting, their brains are a little bit more developed, their bodies are a little more developed, and they can catch up very quickly. So the fact that you are giving them these really incredible tools, they can catch up to those other kids very, very quickly. You just have to have someone like you who is passionate and loves them and cares about them to make sure that they can keep up.
Yeah, I would get very frustrated when I would play for auditions, and then, there'd be someone at the table who's like, ugh, don't they know they're supposed to slate, they're supposed to have a black binder, and no, they don't know. Of course they don't know. If they're coming in for their very first community theater audition, how would they know you didn't tell them? So that was, my very first video on Piano in Heels was literally like, here's how to set up your book and do a basic audition in 60 seconds. And that's like one of my top like saved and shared videos. In 60 seconds, let me show you what nobody has bothered to say.
I'm so impressed. Well, let's talk a little bit more about your career, because that is an interesting part of your career. But I am very curious, because you are a musician and classically trained there. What drew you to the arts? Was it music first or acting? And how did you find your love of theater along the way?
My dad was big on us learning a new instrument every year of elementary school. So I played like 6 different instruments by the time I was in middle school. And then started singing in middle school and then high school, and decided to be a voice major. I was on the Central Coast in California. There wasn't really a musical theater program at my school. There wasn't one at my college. And so like it was opera, even though there wasn't an opera program to go into, which seems sort of absurd. I had all this classical training, intending to go be a choir teacher, and then came to San Diego State, which did have a robust opera program. And I was like, I love being on stage, love wearing a corset, love having my hair all crazy, love getting to dance. And I really enjoyed that. But when I went out, we didn't really get job training, with performing majors in the 90s and 2000s. They just were like, well, good luck to you, go become a teacher. And they didn't tell you how to get into your career pathway. So I tried doing some like independent small opera companies, and I found I just didn't enjoy it. I had already been hired at my high school, like while I was still finishing my master's. So I was like, man, if I'm going to take the time away from everything else that I'm doing to do something, I should love it. And I didn't. It turned out I didn't love opera anymore. And then I went to go see like a Golden Age musical at Coronado Playhouse. And I was like, oh, yes, okay, this is what I want to be doing. And so I went that route. I was not successful because my operatic voice didn't fit with musical theater, didn't know anything about acting except what Christine does in Phantom of the Opera, which is stand there, work a train, and like sing the high notes, but like we can't all be in love never dies all the time. I would get called back, but I would never, book anything because I just didn't fit with the cast and I didn't know what acting was. So I went to an acting coach and then that just transformed my life. So community theater, then to professional theater, and then just very happily working here, and then deciding that I wanted to do more challenging work, making sure that I was always choosing roles for women that have arc and agency of their own, and that they're never just there for somebody else's growth. And then that meant creating my own work and talking to girlfriends that were also creating their work. And so Riot was born.
I feel like as I was hearing your story, theater found you is just what it felt like.
Well, and actually we had just had like an award-winning show choir year. I had spent like 10 years and I was like, I guess I'm not going to be a performer. I'm just going to focus fully on, winning show choir competitions. And we had a year that we just swept everything. All of my students went to AMDA, American Musical and Dramatic Academy in LA. I had, I think, 6 of them go that year. They came home for the summer and had created their own production company. And they were like, oh, Miss LeClair, come audition for us. We're going to do this musical called Aida, which I fell in love with. I was by far the oldest person in the cast, but I could still like drop it. And so like we had a great time. And afterwards I was like, this might be fun, not being 30 with a bunch of 20-year-olds. Let me see if there's other places that I can go where I'm not playing opposite an 18-year-old who's my prince.
Who was my student last year.
Right. Whose mother is like, are you going to get something going with Sarah? No, he's gay and I'm married. And so, no.
Thankfully, you're playing opposite people that are age appropriate now. So that's good.
I try to always find people that are taller, older. I can be small and delicate and young.
Well, we've talked a little bit about Riot Productions. I did read some about it, but I'd love to hear in your words, your mission and your vision for Riot Productions, because I think it's really beautiful. And it's really important work that you're doing.
Thank you. I like to always make sure that I have that adjective that we're intersectional feminists, because that's a primary part of our mission. And just watching in these last 5 years since George Floyd and the real movement in theater to try to like adapt to having more representative stages, it's very difficult if you already have these structures that are centered around a fully white board with a fully white season ticket holder, and that you're doing mostly male written older works from the 80s because that's what those season ticket holders come to see, right? It's very hard to dismantle some of those structures and make room for BIPOC folk. Even introduce the concept of LGBTQ representation that isn't just about AIDS or isn't just about like the trauma of coming out, that there can be love stories that are joyful for gay folk. So we've tried to build that into the mission from the very beginning, and just make it an extension of what I was already trying to do at my school. It's really important to me in my classroom. I teach my version of critical race theory so that there's no music without context. I stopped doing like tap dancing, show choir medleys. We've worked on stuff that's representative. So we're using music that's Kirk Franklin and Natalia Lafourcade and like traditional Mexican pop music with more traditional baladas and boleros, but also like stuff that we see on television, like Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, when we're talking about mental health. So we should be doing music about feeling unwell and expressing our emotions. I'm always trying to get that representation for like where my kids are at that moment. So whether it's the trauma of anti-BIPOC bigotry or the same thing for the LGBTQ community, I want to make sure my students see themselves. So we're watching Beyonce's Homecoming, we're watching Rent, we're doing In the Heights, we're doing Hamilton, we're doing Hadestown. We're trying to make sure that there is no reason in the classroom for anyone to feel shunted to the side. So that's what I try to do with my theater company as well. We started with an entire festival of my dear friend, Carla Navarro. She's a Chilean-American playwright. And her short plays are all duets of women talking about everything from two lesbians about to have a baby, and one of them has changed her mind, to a daughter and her estranged father coming to terms with the death of the mom, trying to show not only plays in Spanish, but plays from different Latinx perspectives. The piece that we just did, Fiel a mí misma, was a trans female playwright who considers herself binational. So she lives on both sides of the Mexican-American border. And, what a beautiful metaphor for what it's like to be inside the LGBTQ community, but often not accepted by that very community, while you're also not being accepted by the mainstream community, while you're talking about being the experience of being queer and Mexican. I'm always trying to make sure that we're telling stories that people will listen to, so that we're practicing empathy. I think women listen better to women telling those stories. We identify with what we recognize. And if in the course of that, we can also introduce one extra thing and say, by the way, here's somebody else's experience that you may not, you might recognize yourself in all of this, but here's one more piece of it that may surprise you. So that's what we try to do with Riot.
It just makes me think, when I was doing my master's, I was doing some studies about like women's involvement with different types of movement and the suffrage movement. But it really started from this connection that women have with, like you might say, the BIPOC community or communities that were really oppressed. And so it doesn't surprise me that your heart is leaning towards that, because that is something that I think, though we don't understand those communities, right? As white women, you and I are both white women, for people that are listening, but we do understand being a woman and what it feels like. When I was reading, to be a side piece or to be something less than human sometimes. And so there's that connectivity that we have with those communities. And it's really beautiful to see you working in those and still promoting all of those stories that are so important. That it's very, very, very exciting.
For sure. I think, the short play that I mentioned, the two lesbians about to have a baby, but one of them has changed her mind. I think anybody who's a mom, including myself, I have 3 kids, you have that moment where you're like, this isn't what I decided. You get 3 years into it and you're like, nobody told me all of these pathways in my life were going to diverge. And there wasn't, I was told I could have it all. And that is not, those are not the facts. And so to have a frank discussion about maybe not wanting motherhood, I think that's something we all can recognize in ourselves at some point in our lives, no matter how much you want. I was raised Catholic and I wanted 10 kids. And then, got to my 3rd and was like, oh, man, this is really hard work.
Right?
Not what I was promised. Nobody's bringing me flowers.
Oh, right? No. They're throwing up on you or whatever. Literally. Yeah. I think that's really cool that you presented a play that talks about women maybe not wanting to be mothers, because that is still a very taboo subject for women who are pregnant, women who are birthing, people that are birthing and bringing people into the world. That is a very taboo topic to discuss, but something that is very real and tangible for many people. Kudos to you for addressing that and bringing a playwright in that was able to do that. That's super cool. Okay, so talk to me a little bit about starting a company in San Diego. So I'm from Houston, and a lot of our theater companies, especially since COVID, have had trouble keeping spaces or even keeping their doors open. And so how has that journey been for you all starting a company? What is San Diego like? There's a lot of big theaters. There's a lot of small theaters. And so I'm just kind of curious what you're wrestling with and having to work through.
Well, it was really a good time to do that because we just started a year ago, and then we were coming out of COVID, as you said. There were a lot of companies, unfortunately, that were having a hard time paying their rent, and we made the shift, I think, as a city from 6-week runs and 4 nights or 6 nights a week. We were starting to see 3-week runs and 4-week runs or 2-week runs, and things were getting shorter. So there was more space for other small theaters. And so we saw a ton of small theater. I think there's maybe 20 small theater companies like me that have very specific missions. So some that are just for specific BIPOC groups, specific LGBT groups, some that are specifically about presenting drag, some that are just for music, for cabaret projects. So it was a great time to do that. If you could scrape together an audience, a lot of the theaters were like, yeah, just bring someone in, we'll split the tickets with us. So that's what thankfully, a lot of venues have done for us. And I think people were hungry for art, but But like you and I said, as we were talking earlier, they wanted something different. As we all experienced during COVID, we were all watching Tiger King at the same time. So like tastes had changed.
I forgot about that show.
Maybe it was the right time for the Great British Baking Show musical. You know what I mean? And so like my friends at Loud Fringe just did a project, 12th Night of the Living Dead, where they did 12th Night and really didn't change any of it except that they made Viola not survive the shipwreck and she was a zombie from the beginning. And then all of her lines, she just grunted. And so like the larger feminist question is, does the woman in the Shakespeare play matter? Does anybody listening to her? But also it's hilarious to watch as every scene she would bite one more person. And so the scene would start devolving and devolving and devolving. And they were doing this very immersive version of a play that we've all seen a million times. And now suddenly, I was in the audience in this, warehouse in the barrio going, I'm not sure what these old people next to me are thinking, but I heard them say, this is so much better than the Globe. I'm so happy to be here. So yeah, it's a great time to be experimenting. And when you don't have to pay the rent, you can experiment.
Absolutely. And, give yourself a little pat on the back for people saying this is better than the Globe. Don't tell them you said that. Well, and I have a dear friend that wrote, it's a college book, but it's Playing Shakespeare's Women Playing Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks a lot about that. We all die. So that's very interesting.
Or we're silent for pages or
yeah. Does it even matter if she doesn't talk, if she just grunts? That's a very interesting question. I would have loved to see that. That's very cool. Well, let's talk really quick because I do want to hit on this because I think it's very interesting. You have a scholarship fund. Tell me in your own words what that scholarship fund is for. And I think we've probably talked a little bit about why I think I can guess you started this, but just give us the quick answer to that.
Yeah. So coming out of those award-winning seasons that I had as a show choir director, I started thinking like, how else, I was already doing running club. We were doing dance day marathons. We were starting our show choir stuff like back in September so that we could perform it in March. We're trying to figure out what are all these ways that we can like get the kids to level so that they could realistically compete with Hollywood choirs. And then I started thinking, well, how can we get them voice lessons? So I hit up all my friends. I was giving the kids voice lessons as much as I could physically fit hours into the day. And then I just had the idea to have a cabaret concert with all of my professional friends from the community. We raised money, and then I literally just gave it to a music studio and said, how many of my kids could you do for this much money? And then year after year, it was fun for my friends, fun for the audience. And then I would just hand it over and be like, can you do 2 more kids for this much money this year? Can you? And, trading favors and playing for people's auditions in exchange. And then last year when we started Riot, I was like, okay, so let's take this beyond my school. Let's put this into all of East County, which is throughout East County, which is Chula Vista, Spring Valley, La Mesa, El Cajon. It is economically underserved and primarily BIPOC area. So like on top of that, our city in San Diego is redlined. So there is no public transportation realistically that takes anybody north of the 8, which is where all the theaters are. So trying to figure out, could we amplify more voices when all of these professional theaters are saying we can't get Black kids to come see our shows or audition because there's no trolley station that comes to you. And those kids don't have transportation from East County. So could I help you get the BIPOC folk that you want by encouraging them and getting them all voice lessons or studio time or professional mentors. So we expanded the scholarship into a competition last year that's open to anybody that is a resident of East County. And then we have professional mentors from all different walks of life. So some are recording stars, some are film stars. One of our judges last year is like a Disney cruise performer. Our judges this year, one is, frequent performer at the Globe and Moonlight. And then the other one is artistic director at another feminist theater. So we're trying to also make those connections for the kids so that they can have someone to, first of all, ask. Like, if I'm a dark-skinned Black girl that's from San Diego, how do I get where you are? But also help them get in front of those people so that when they go into the season call, Desiree Clark Miller from Moxie goes, I remember you. You did this song, on top of whatever we can provide them with the scholarship fund.
Well, we are going to say at the end of the program how people can support this scholarship fund because it is very important and really, really beautiful work you're doing there. I always get so surprised when I have guests on. I read up and I do some stuff, but I just had no idea. It's just, I have chilly bumps. It's so cool.
Well, we all are passionate about our art. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing Fringe.
Right. Absolutely. I believe that with all my heart. We will talk Fringe. We'll transition out of this. I could just talk to you all day about that. But we do need to talk about Fringe. So let's talk about your show. I'm going to sing-song it. Death and Murder and Poison and Scene. I was telling you earlier, this title makes me want to see the show from the beginning because it's just the campiest little title. And it tells me exactly what this show is going to be like. It's very, very clear. So you're the writer in this show. So take me through your creative process. At the time of this recording, you may still be in rehearsals, but how involved are the actors? How involved is your director? What is your process like for creating a new show with a cast?
So I did the show Perfect Crime about, I think, 2 years ago. And it's written by Warren Manzi, who is the writer of Clue. So it's got lots of twists and turns, but perhaps too many. So it's so confusing that they literally hand out like a packet of FAQs when you sit down in the audience in New York. It's got a 1-star Yelp review, but it is still going 30 years later, which is psychotic because it's just a truly awful script that I had a great time being in. It was hilarious and fun, but afterwards everyone was like, whose baby was it? Did he sleep with so how did she get, like everyone had so many questions. So I sat down after we closed the show and I was like, all right, I'm gonna fix this script. So I rewrote the whole script top to bottom as a drama. I called some friends over because we do a lot of development readings with Riot. And I was like, let's read this. And you tell me if it makes any sense. And so they read it. And I wrote it originally as a drama. And my friends were like, this is funny, but not really. So could you just make it a comedy? So I was like, all right, so what if the reason that it's been open for 30 years is like somebody got killed and they're like buried in the walls of the theater and the show must go on. So let's write it that way. And so it's like Noises Off, where there's half of the cast is on stage, like doing the murder mystery. And the other half is like madly trying to keep things from burning down and bodies from falling out of the walls. And yeah, so we did 3 development readings in the course of working through this. Little issues, like trying to make sure, like, if someone's going to get poisoned, like, where did that bottle come from? Like, did we mention it enough times that the audience is going to track? I try to always be funny, but I want to make sure that I slip in some feminist messages. So, there's moments where everybody's breaking down and then the psychotic person is asking for whatever she wants. And then someone says, well, I want to close the wage gap and tear down the patriarchy, but we can't always have what we want. And then we move on to the next scene, just trying to be irreverent. And then we had our first like physical blocking sort of fight choreography because it's a farce rehearsal last night. We had such a fun time. Our fight choreographer, Scott Amiotti, took us through like we always start with safety with Riot and like claiming your body and being very clear about what is okay and what is not okay. And then everybody echoing those things so that we can feel safe and secure and ownership over our bodies. But then we really just sort of started with these basic structures and everybody started creating. Katie Drysdale, who plays our like psychotic break actor who's in the middle of a Strasbourg-induced mental breakdown, turned to my co-star, Brendan McNeil, and she kind of whispered to me, she's like, I want to do a lift. And so I was like, well, Brendan, can we do a lift? And she's like, but what would it be for? I don't know. Let's try it. So we played around a lot. I invited my students to come and be with us and just be extra bodies in case we wanted to see what things would look like with all 6 of us while we were doing multiple things. And so they got to experience that. And it's just collaborative. So we're having a great time. And I have not laughed so hard the last 48 hours since we did our table read and we did the physical blocking. It's just been so joyful, especially right now. Things are heavy. So it's just been so fun. And we do a lot of trauma-based work with Riot. So it's fun to just do something that I'm not going to have to cry.
Right. Well, and how did it feel when your friends were like, you're like, I have this drama, and they're like, this is funny.
That was a hard pill to swallow, that they're like, this is funny, but maybe not in the way. And I was like, no, I did intend it to be a little funny. And there are times like as we're doing stuff that I was like, when this was a drama, this made more sense.
You're like, I got to change that line. That doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah. You want me to be a clown? All right. That's fine. We're not really at the point yet with Riot where we have done a couple open auditions, but having safe spaces is very important to me. So we tend to start with, people that we know are good humans, and then we go from there. So I'm working right now with 6 fantastic, well, I'm the 6th, so a cast of 6 fantastic artists, and then our director, Laura Preble, who's one of our board members, and she ran the Fringe the last 3 years. She worked at the Tribune. She's been a drama teacher. So we take people who know a lot of good stuff and have a lot of good heart. And of course, it's almost always a great experience.
Okay, so where did you perform A Perfect Crime? Because I was wondering if you had actually seen it, but you were in it. You were in this really bad show. Did somebody in San Diego do it? And is it meant to be a drama? Is it now a comedy?
It is a drama, although there are moments that I think are quite absurd. And, one of my monologues that I rewrote into one of the things in my show is that my character, Catherine, named after Catherine Russell, will not say this line. And it's a big point of contention between herself and the director. And it's a line from Perfect Crime where she does this whole monologue about essentially being attacked at a masquerade party, and he picked her up and carried her into the bushes. And then she talks about his throbbing perfect manhood. And I read it and I was like, I am not saying that. Not today, not now, not ever.
Who would ever say that? That is no.
Right. So no woman talks about, and she's telling this to her new boyfriend about her current husband. So I don't know who talks. In any case, so every night I never said that line. And I would get line notes and I'm like, I don't know. I keep forgetting.
Oh, I forgot.
The whole play of Perfect Crime is all men and a single woman. And my male co-stars started teasing me. They're like, you got to just say it. Just one night, just say it. And I was like, all right, you'll see. And so I learned it again. I did the entire thing. And then I gave, my co-star the full brunt of the perfect manhood monologue. And afterwards, he's like, no, you're right. Please don't ever, you can go ahead and just delete that. And I was like, no, now I'm going to say it every night.
Yes. It's all your fault. Thank you very much.
Yes.
We are getting close to time, so I want to make sure we get to our very last question. It has been so much fun talking to you and learning about the work you are doing. It's really, truly incredible. And there are just so many artists like yourself that are doing this kind of work in their cities, in their hometowns. And I mean, not exactly what you're doing, but just doing something that they're really passionate about and really making an impact in the community with artists and then in the community as well. So thank you. I don't know if you get told that a lot, but I am telling you.
I don't think any woman gets told that enough. So
right. But I will talk about your throbbing manhood. So you need to text me that so that I can I don't know, make a poster of it.
It's the button that you wear.
It needs to be a Fringe button. There you go. So good. Okay, so I like to end with this last question. What has been your most interesting or awkward Fringe interaction that you've ever had?
I have massive anxiety, which I think is a weird thing that a lot of performers have, that we get energy when we're on stage. Anything that's outside of the script causes us a lot of stress and anxiety. And I had a concussion a couple years ago, so I have a hard time thinking on my feet. I sometimes lose my words. I was mute for a little while after I got that bump on the noggin. So I still struggle a little bit. And I didn't know until we were in Fringe that part of it was everybody needs to stand up now and tell about your show. So we're all in the audience and they're like, okay, are there any Fringe artists? And I was like, nope, no Fringe artists here. I was just kind of keeping my head down. But of course, we're all from San Diego, so everybody knew each other. So my friends are poking me and say, tell what your show is about. And then the other thing was my show was complex last year. It wasn't about anyone, what is Fleabag about? It's a show about grief. That doesn't, encapsulate it. So my show also wasn't a single sentence. So I was like, I don't know what to say. And I don't want to stand up in front of all these people. And this feels awkward and I'm not going to be able to come up with it on the fly. So every single time I would try to like sneak out before, after the applause, I would, standing ovation and then the door, lest someone say something to you. And
I am not explaining my show. Don't make me do it.
come to my show. It's funny. I'm in it.
See, there you go. That's perfect. So
I don't know. It's awkward.
Well, you got to memorize your pitch for this year or just sneak out. You know the drill now. You know how to do it. You're skilled at sneaking out, so you can do it. Awesome. Well, Sarah, it has been, again, such a delight to visit with you today. Thank you so much for being on What the Fringe.
Yes, drinks when you get here.
Oh my gosh, yes, I'm so ready. I'm so ready. And to meet all the people in the show, and we can do a lift.
Yes. Oh, yes. So fun. We'll take you around all the haunts.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, Death and Murder and Poison and Scene by Sarah Lita LeClair will be playing at the 2025 San Diego Fringe Festival this May. You can donate to Riot's Scholarship Fund, which we talked a lot about, which supports those performers from the historically underserved communities of East County, San Diego on Venmo at Riot-Productions. And you can find out more details about Riot Productions at their website at riotproductions.art and on Instagram and Facebook at Riot Productions Inc. INC. And you can also follow Sarah on that TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube at Piano in Heels. What the Fringe is produced and hosted by me, Lauren Hantz. This episode was edited by Ben Ellis of Renowned Media, and those sweet tunes you hear are provided by Paul Snyder of Orchestra of Sound, and our logo was designed by Ruby Arnold of Ruby Makes Things. What the Fringe can be found on your favorite podcast platforms and now on YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know when new episodes release. Keep up with What the Fringe on Instagram at whatthefringe_productions and find us online at whatthefringeproductions.com. Look, if some creep is hitting on you at the Fringe bar, just turn around, look them in the eye, and give them
the full brunt of the perfect manhood monologue.